All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I've been going over these slides for the Farrell Microsoft C# 2015 an Introduction on Object-Oriented Programming text. I've been going over in particular the PowerPoints and writing code on most every chapter, and I'm back doing PowerPoints and I'm back here at Rankin, so I'm going to try to quickly go over Chapter 12 here. Much of the stuff in Chapter 12 we've already talked about. Not all of it, so I'm just going to highlight the main points, the new stuff, so to speak. All right, one thing to realize, and it doesn't say it here, but I do want you to understand this, is controls are objects. So we're going to learn about controls, but a control is just an object. So if I create a button control, it's part of the button class. We'll talk about how the IDE can automatically generate code for you, how to set a controls font, and I've shown you that, how to create a form with link labels, how to add color to a form, I've shown you that, how to add checkboxes and radio buttons to forms, how to add picture boxes to forms, list boxes, combo boxes, checklist boxes to forms, how to add month calendars and date time pickers, how to work with a form's layout, how to add a menu strip to a form, and I've shown you that, and how to use some of the other controls we have not talked about. So if we look in here, you'll notice that all of these different kinds of controls are type of system.windows.forms something or other. Even more. All right. Most controls have at least some properties in common. Some of those properties are shown here. I'm not going to run over them. Okay. Again, if you want to know more about a property, you can put the control on your form, go into the properties list, and literally just click on the property, and on the bottom of your properties window, you'll get a description of what that property is all about. More properties. More properties. Okay. So in English, if I create this, if this is my program, and I put a label out here that says, click the button, all right, and I put a button out there. And if I double click that button, what's going to happen is that button's click event is going to come up in the code window, all right? So when we first created these two things, and it's assuming here that we're going to give them certain names, the system will come in here and it'll create this stuff for us. Now, what they mention here is that you can go into the form1.designer.cs file to see this stuff. So this is code that gets created for you by the system, not by you, but by the system. I would recommend that you never, ever open any system files. All right, people say, well, I want to learn, and I can appreciate that, but that said, the problem with opening up files like that, the problem with doing that, is it's system-generated code. So if you change it, and you happen to change it and save it, you can screw up what's in there. We've looked at this already as far as setting font. You can set the font for virtually any kind of control. All right. So there's different ways that you can set up fonts. If you don't want to set it up within your properties window, you can also set it up through code. Any property that we've done thus far in this text, any property that we've ever set on the properties window, you can always set it in code. Some properties do not show in the properties window. They can only be set in code. All right. A link label, as it says, is similar to a label, but it allows you to link to other sources such as a web page or a file or something else. All right, if you double click on the control, it brings it up in a window, code window, and you can go and you can set up any of these properties. Notice the default property will be link clicked. So if I put a link label on a form and I double click that link label, it's going to bring up that link label's link clicked property. The link label, and we'll see an example in just a minute, it appears as underlined text, which is blue by default because it looks like a hyperlink. When you put your mouse over that, it changes to a hand. If you click it, it generates a click event, so it executes again the link clicked method. And the link visited property can be set to true if you want to determine whether or not the user has clicked on a link. So these would be in blue. Adding color to a form, I've shown you this already. When you add color to a form and you do it the way I've shown you through the properties window, again, things get added to that designer.cs class. And that's what they're talking about here. I should mention to you that it's probably going to be about 10 minutes or so until students start coming in here. So I may have to break this lecture up into 2 lectures. All right, because as soon as students start coming in, it starts to get too loud in here and I have to stop speaking. So, checkboxes, and I would have actually put an S there, but the author didn't. As it says, they're used to select or deselect an option. Here are examples of checkboxes right there. So I can choose for my toppings any one, I can choose none, any one, any two, or any three. Radio buttons are similar to checkboxes, but they're called mutually exclusive because only one of these can be selected at a time. So if I dine in, I don't pick up my pizza or whatever it is. If I have delivery, I don't dine in, type of an idea. So if I've got multiple things to choose from and I can choose any combination or none to all of them, I use checkboxes. If I have multiple combinations but I can only choose one of them, I use radio buttons. An access key is a hotkey. So for instance, if you've ever seen this, and there's not great examples anymore because of the way this is set up, but if I click view, and it's not going to work in here. But if you remember from the quote olden days unquote, when you used to do things like you would click file and then you'd see exit underneath it, that would be an example of a hotkey where you could do an Alt X, for example. Here's code for radio buttons. Notice the checked, and that's whether you use a checkbox or a radio button. All right, the check, notice they both do the check change event. And that will say that one or more is checked here and one is checked here. So in this example, we'd be ordering a pizza that had onions and sausage on it, and that pizza would be being ordered for delivery. We can put a picture box control in. I used to have students, and maybe I'll have the students in my class do it when I teach this. We would put we'd put a picture on the screen. All right, a picture box on the screen. And we would simulate flipping a coin. If when you press the button to flip the coin, if it came up heads, in that picture box, we would put a picture maybe of a quarter, and you'd see Washington's head on it. I think it was Washington on a quarter. And if it was tails, you'd see the picture, the tails part. All right. So as it says, a picture box is a control that can display graphics. Something as simple as a bitmap, something as complex as a JPEG or a GIF. The image sets the image that appears in the picture box. The size mode shows, and this is an important one, because you can set it to normal, stretch image, which resizes it to fit, auto size, which makes the picture box fit the image. So stretch image says make the picture box fit the image. Auto size means make the image fit the size of the picture box. And center image, which centers the image in the picture box. Click, as it says, it's what happens if you click the picture that's in there. All right. Now the example they give is kind of silly. Shop with us, save money. But for example, if you were writing an application, you don't write many web applications using C#, although you could. This could be a picture box that was linked, so when you clicked on it, it could go back to your main page of your application. All right. You can have list boxes, check boxes, and combo boxes. We're going to look at all three of these. The list box, as it says, displays a list of items that the user can select. By default, they have only single selection. So I might have a list of states, and it says, what state do you live in? All right. Or if the person had maybe they lived in Missouri, but they had a summer home or a winter home in Arizona and maybe a summer cottage in Wisconsin, you might let them select multiple selections. Either way, whether it's single selection or multi-select, you set that in the selection mode property. The selected item is whatever item or items the user has selected. So some of the major properties are shown here. Again, I'm not going to go over these. hopefully most of them are pretty self-explanatory as far as what's happening. All right? So here's a list box. It says enter the strings in the collection. So you can enter the information into a list box right from the properties window, or you can do it in code. There's multiple ways of doing it. Again, when you see these things with multiple, that means that you can select more than one. If it's set to none, you can't select anything. If it's set to one, you can select only one. So here's an example. You might say, what class are you currently in right here? And you might set it up equal so it was set to one, because you can only be in one class at a time. You might say, which of these classes are you taking in here? That you might set up to multi-extend, because you might be taking multiple classes. All right, the combo box is a combination of a list box and some kind of an editing control, where here you can select an airline, or you might be able to enter in your own type of an idea. Here is a checklist box. So whichever ones you select, rather than them being highlighted, they're checked. Next is a month calendar and a date time picker. You've seen these. They're very popular today. If you, let's say that I'm going to write an application for a dentist, and they might say, when do you want to schedule an appointment? And they click, maybe they click in a text box and this comes up. Because it's much easier for them to say, I want my appointment to be on Thursday, Thursday the 29th, that probably is March, all right, than it is to know exactly what day of the month, etc. that would be. Month calendar and date time pickers have, it's basically the same type of control. So they have the same properties and methods, and again, you can see them there. Now, I realize I'm going through this chapter very quickly. I'm probably going to be done with it in the idea of somewhere around 10 minutes. But the idea is hopefully two things. A, we've gone over the majority of these controls already, and B, those we haven't gone over, those I've just kind of glossed over or gone over quickly right now, they make sense to you as far as what's going on. In other words, they're fairly intuitive. We can add code in there. This would be a countdown type of calendar. All right, for instance, one of the things that we'll discuss in the ASP.NET class is we'll go over a countdown calendar. We'll write an application, or we'll go through an application in the book and kind of write it too, for what's called a Halloween Superstore. And on the very bottom, unless it's Halloween, we will have how many days it is till Halloween. Now, as I'm doing this lecture, it is, I believe, September 22nd, 2016. Which means there's 8 more days left in September, and then 31 more days after that until Halloween. So I could have a message on the bottom here that said something like this: only 31 more days till Halloween. So that's how I could do something like that. All right. So that was the calendar control. The date time picker is similar. All right. But again, when you click this, it's going to basically bring up the monthly calendar control. All right, so again, they're used very similarly. I'm not going to say they're the same thing. Technically, they're not. All right, hopefully you noticed this already, that when you're moving different controls and you're putting those controls on a form, that you'll get these blue lines here, which are called snap lines, to line things up, and that's what they're talking about. They help you align new controls with other controls you already have in place. It makes your application look more professional, for lack of better words. You can also use the location property in the properties window to display exactly where something is located. There are other things that you can use with the form's layout. There's the anchor property, which, as it says, to make sure it always remains at a fixed distance from the side of a container. The dock, so that it stretches when the container size is adjusted. Padding, not that different really from padding that we've seen in HTML, which specifies the distance between dock controls and the form's edges. So here's some examples of how those can be used. All right, and there are other properties also. For instance, I've talked about the locked property, where once I've got my form looking pretty much the way that I want it to look, what I will typically do then is I will highlight, hold down on my mouse, do that invisible lassoing of every single control on the form, highlight all of them, go into my properties window and find the locked property and set it to true. That way none of my controls are allowed to move. All right, but here's some examples. Group boxes and panels are a way that you can group things together. All right. Group boxes display a caption and don't have scroll bars. Panels don't display a caption but have scroll bars. All right. And I'll try to come up with a program example. I'll probably do it on the fly where I demonstrate a lot of these things just so you can see how they work. I showed you back when we did the array program, which seems like a long, long time ago. I showed you how to create a menu. It's very simple to do. As it says, a menu is a horizontal list of options that appears under the title bar. You add a menu strip control to any form, or you can, to any form you create. When you double click an entry, the click event for that is shown. So here we're doing font, and here we're doing color. So notice when I do font, if I were to click this one right here that says type here, that would be a sub-menu item under font. If I click here like the author did, that would be something at the same level as font. So there's always a lot of different ways that you can do this stuff. There are other controls that we have not discussed. All right. So in this chapter, it was very quick. Like I said, I thought it'd be around 10 minutes. We learned a little bit about some controls we had not talked about yet. We talked about the fact that when you double click on a control, the IDE will automatically open the code window for the default event of that control. We looked again, but we've really done this in the past, on how to set a control's font. We looked a little bit at link labels. We revisited adding color to a form. We looked at checkboxes and radio buttons, picture boxes, list boxes, combo boxes, check boxes, month calendars, and date time pickers. Then we looked at how you can use some of those properties on the form and how you can lay them out to make them look the way you want them to look. And we ended by talking about the menu strip and how to add menus. Again, there are other controls that you can also use in addition to the ones that have been shown here. So that's it for this chapter. When I come back and start to go through the next chapter, chapter 13, all right, chapter 13 is on event handling in C#. So we'll talk about, events that naturally happen and events that you can cause to have happen, which may not be as natural. And then we'll end going over chapter 14, where we'll talk about files and streams. All right, this book does not discuss databases. This is about as close as it gets to databases. All right, I'm in the middle right now. I'm just about done producing the chapter 11 one, so I have to leave this up, otherwise I'm going to have a problem. All right, so I'm going to have to leave this up, literally, as you can see, for about 1 more minute, and then when I get done, I will close this thing that's coming up so I can resave the one for chapter 11. Might not make a lot of sense, but if you see some stuff that looks like, why is he doing this incessant rambling at the end of the lecture for chapter 12? That's why. Because I have to close this before, this is the one for chapter 11, and I have to close this before I can save for chapter 12. Otherwise, the system, the way that Camtasia works, will get a little bit confused. All right? So that's really it for chapter 12.